Three orphan children on the dusty roads of Arizona Territory had no idea that helping a stranded wealthy rancher fix his broken wagon wheel would change their lives forever. When Samuel Crawford's wagon broke down miles from town with a crucial business meeting waiting, these forgotten kids didn't hesitate to lend a hand. They refused his money, asked for nothing in return, and disappeared back into their hard life at the orphanage. But what happened next will restore your faith in humanity. Just one day later, a covered wagon rolled up to Isite Mary's home for children. And what the driver told Sister Margaret left everyone in tears. This is a true story from the Old West that proves sometimes the smallest acts of kindness create the biggest miracles. Don't forget to subscribe and ring that bell for more incredible stories from the frontier. And let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love hearing from our Western family. The autumn winds of 1885 swept across the Arizona Territory with an unforgiving bite, carrying the promise of an early winter storm. Samuel Crawford, owner of the sprawling Double Eagle Ranch, gripped the reins of his finest stallion as he guided his loaded wagon down the winding trail toward Silver Ridge. At 52, Sam was a man accustomed to control. His ranch was the most prosperous in 3 counties. His horses were sought after from California to Texas, and his word carried weight in every business deal from here to Phoenix. The wagon creaked under the weight of his finest leather goods and silver-adorned saddles, samples meant to seal the biggest cattle contract of his career. This wasn't just any meeting. It was with the territorial government, a deal that would supply horses to cavalry units across the Southwest. The kind of contract that could set a man up for life, even a man who was already wealthy beyond most people's dreams. Sam had built his empire from nothing, starting with a single horse and a determination forged in the harsh realities of frontier life. After losing his beloved wife Eleanor to fever 3 years prior, work had become his sole companion, his ranch the only thing that filled the hollow ache in his chest. He threw himself into breeding the finest horses, expanding his land and accumulating wealth with a single-minded focus that impressed business partners and worried the few friends he had left. The meeting in Silver Ridge was scheduled for those sharp, and punctuality was everything in business. Sam prided himself on never being late, never making excuses, and never letting anyone down who depended on him. His reputation as a reliable man was worth more than all the silver in his strong box. But as the morning wore on, the sky began to darken with ominous clouds. The wind picked up, sending tumbleweeds dancing across the trail and stirring up dust devils in the distance. Sam urged his horse forward, calculating the time in his head. If he maintained this pace, he'd arrive in Silver Ridge with 20 minutes to spare. Enough time to clean up and present himself properly to the government officials. That's when disaster struck. Crack! The sharp sound of splintering wood echoed across the desert as Sam's wagon lurched violently to one side. The left rear wheel, weakened by months of rough terrain and heavy loads, finally gave way. The wooden spokes shattered like kindling, sending the wagon tilting at a dangerous angle. Sam pulled hard on the reins, bringing his startled horse to a stop as the wagon settled with a grinding thud onto its damaged axle. "Damn it all to hell," Sam cursed, his voice carrying across the empty landscape. He jumped down from the driver's seat, his polished boots hitting the dusty ground with a thump. The broken wheel lay in pieces around the wagon. Some spokes buried in the dirt. Others scattered like broken bones across the trail. Sam circled the wagon, assessing the damage with growing desperation. This wasn't something that could be fixed with rope and willpower. The wheel was completely destroyed. They need a replacement wheel, proper tools, and at least 2 strong men to lift the wagon. Out here, 15 miles from the nearest settlement, he might as well have been stranded on the moon. He pulled his pocket watch from his vest with trembling fingers. 11:30, 2 and medio hours until the most important meeting of his life, and he was stuck in the middle of nowhere with a broken-down wagon and no way to signal for help. The government officials wouldn't wait. They had other ranchers eager for the contract. Men who would show up on time. With their horses and their promises. The wind howled around him, stirring up the dust and carrying the scent of approaching rain. In the distance, he could see storm clouds gathering on the horizon, dark and threatening. If the rains came, the trails would turn to mud, making travel impossible for days. Sam Crawford, the man who controlled thousands of acres and hundreds of horses, who employed dozens of men and commanded respect across the territory, stood helpless beside his broken wagon. For the first time in years, all his wealth and influence meant nothing. It was just a man alone on a desolate trail, watching his carefully laid plans crumble like the shattered spokes at his feet. Sam stared at the wreckage of his wagon wheel, his mind racing through increasingly desperate options. It could unhitch his horse and ride bareback to Silver Ridge, but that would mean abandoning thousands of dollars worth of merchandise to any passing bandits or scavengers. The samples he carried weren't just valuable. They were specifically crafted to showcase his ranch's quality, each piece a testament to the superior horses he bred. Without them, his presentation would be worthless. Used empty words from another rancher making promises he couldn't prove. The pocket watch felt heavy in his hand as he checked it again. 11:45. Every minute that ticked by was another nail in the coffin of his dreams. The government contract would go to someone else. Probably Thomas Whitmore from the Lazy W Ranch, his biggest competitor, who'd been circling this deal like a vulture for months. Whitmore would love nothing more than to see Samuel Crawford fail, especially after Sam had outbid him on prime grazing land last spring. Sam walked around his horse, patting the stallion's neck as he considered his options. "What do you think, Thunder? Sold we make a run for it?" The horse snorted and pawed the ground as if sensing his master's distress. But even Thunder, fast as he was, couldn't carry both Sam and the heavy samples the 15 millas to Silver Ridge in time for the meeting. The wind picked up again, colder now, carrying with it the unmistakable smell of rain. Sam looked up at the darkening sky with growing dread. Those weren't just storm clouds gathering. They were the kind of black rolling masses that brought flash floods and turned dry creek beds into raging torrents. If the rain started before he could get moving, he'd be trapped out here until morning, maybe longer. It began pulling tools from the wagon bed, hoping against hope that he might somehow jury-rig a temporary wheel. But as he sorted through his meager collection of rope, a small hatchet, and basic supplies, the futility of the situation became clear. It was a rancher, not a wheelwright. Even if he had the skills, there wasn't enough wood on his entire wagon to craft a new wheel, and certainly nothing that could support the weight of his loaded cargo. "Think, Crawford. Think," he muttered to himself, pacing back and forth beside the crippled wagon. In all his years of business, he'd never failed to meet an obligation. His word was his bond, and his reputation for reliability had opened more doors than his money ever could. Men trusted him because he delivered on his promises. Rain or shine, hell or high water. The irony wasn't lost on him. Here he was, one of the wealthiest men in the territory, and he was as helpless as a greenhorn, fresh off the wagon train from back east. All his success, all his careful planning, all his meticulous preparation, and he was going to be undone by a piece of wood and some metal spokes. Sam thought about Eleanor, about what she would have said in a moment like this. She'd always been the practical one, the voice of reason when his pride threatened to get in the way of good sense. "Sometimes, Samuel," she used to say, "the Lord humbles us just when we think we've got it all figured out." She'd probably tell him that losing one contract wasn't the end of the world, that there would be other opportunities. But this wasn't just about the money. Though losing this contract would hurt financially. This was about proving that the Double Eagle Ranch was the premier horse operation in the Southwest. This was about building a legacy that would outlast him. Something that would make Eleanor proud if she could see him from wherever she'd gone. The first drops of rain began to fall, fat and heavy, striking the dusty ground with audible impacts. Sam looked up at the sky, feeling the moisture on his weathered face, and for a moment he almost gave in to despair. The storm was coming, whether he was ready or not, and there was nothing his money, his influence, or his determination could do to stop it. Time was running out, and Samuel Crawford, master of his domain, controller of his destiny, had never felt more powerless in his entire life. The first drops of rain were turning into a steady drizzle when Sam heard something unexpected cutting through the whistle of the wind. Voices, young voices, carried on the breeze from somewhere down the trail behind him. He turned, squinting through the gathering gloom, and saw three small figures making their way along the dusty path. As they drew closer, Sam could make out their details. Three children, none of them looking older than 14, walking with the kind of purpose that spoke of familiarity with these lonely trails. They wore simple patched clothing, the kind of hand-me-downs that spoke of hard times and careful mending. The oldest, a boy with sandy hair sticking out from under a worn felt hat, carried a canvas sack slung over his shoulder. Beside him walked a girl with braided auburn hair, her dress clean but faded from many washings. The youngest, a freckled boy who couldn't have been more than 10, skipped along beside them, seemingly oblivious to the approaching storm. Sam's first instinct was suspicion. Out here in the territory, you learn to be wary of strangers, especially when you were carrying valuables. But as the children drew closer, he could see they were just that, children. Their faces were open and curious, not calculating or threatening. Still, what were kids doing out here alone, miles from any settlement? The oldest boy noticed the broken wagon first, pointing it out to his companions. They stopped about 20 pies away. The three of them huddled together as they took in the scene. The well-dressed man, the expensive wagon tilted at an odd angle, and the scattered remains of the wheel. "Mister," the sandy-haired boy called out, his voice carrying a note of genuine concern. "Looks like you're having some trouble there." Sam straightened up, brushing the rain from his vest. Up close, he could see that despite their worn clothing, the children were clean and well cared for. The girl had intelligent brown eyes that seemed to take in everything at once, while the youngest boy's face was bright with curiosity. "That's putting it mildly, son," Sam replied, his voice gruff with frustration. "We'll get out on me, and I've got somewhere important to be." The girl stepped forward slightly, studying the broken wheel with the kind of practical assessment that surprised Sam. "That's a bad break," she said, her voice soft but confident. "Spokes are all shattered. Do they need a whole new wheel to fix that proper?" Sam nodded grimly. "That's what I figured. You children shouldn't be out here with a storm coming. Where are your folks?" The three exchanged a glance that Sam couldn't quite read. There was something there, not shame exactly, but a kind of resigned acceptance that spoke of hard lessons learned young. "We're from St. Mary's in Silver Ridge," the oldest boy said simply. "Been in town doing some work for Dr. Henderson, helping him move supplies. I'm Jack. This here's Molly and the little one's Tommy. Orphans." Sam felt an unexpected pang of something. Not quite pity, but recognition. He'd been alone in the world once, though not quite so young. These children were making their way in a hard world with nothing but their wits and whatever kindness strangers might show them. "Well, Jake, I'm Sam Crawford," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "I appreciate you stopping, but there's not much anyone can do about this wheel. You they best get on the Silver Ridge before this storm really hits." Tommy, the youngest, had been studying the wagon with the intense focus that only children could muster. Suddenly, he piped up, "Mr. Crawford, we helped fix a wheel for old Pete's cart last month when it broke down near the church. Molly's real good with tools." "Molly?" Shot the boy a warning look, but Jake was already nodding thoughtfully. "Tommy's right. We've done our share of fixing things around St. Mary's. Sister Margaret says we're pretty handy when we put our minds to it." Sam looked at the three of them. These Ismail, unlikely saviors who'd appeared out of nowhere on this desolate trail. Common sense told him that children couldn't solve a problem that had him stumped. But something in their earnest faces made him hesitate before dismissing their offer outright. Hackey set down his canvas sack and walked around the broken wagon, his young eyes studying the damage with surprising expertise. "We'll need to find something to use as a lever to lift the wagon," he said, his voice taking on the confident tone of someone who'd solved problems before, "and we'll need wood for a makeshift wheel." Sam watched in amazement as the three children immediately went to work with the efficiency of a seasoned crew. Molly knelt beside the shattered wheel, sorting through the broken spokes and examining the metal rim that had somehow remained intact. Her small fingers traced the curved iron, checking for cracks or weaknesses. "The rim's still good," she announced. "If we can find enough straight wood and something to bind it with, we might be able to make something that'll hold long enough to get you to town." Tommy had wandered off the trail and was already dragging dead branches back toward the wagon. "There's lots of good wood over by those rocks," he called out, his young voice bright with excitement at the adventure. "So many of these pieces are real straight." Sam stood there for a moment, stunned by their immediate willingness to help. "Now, wait just a minute, he began. I can't ask you children to you didn't ask, Jake interrupted with a grin. We offered. Besides, Sister Margaret always says, the good Lord puts us where we're needed, and seems like you need us right about now. The rain was falling steadier now, but the children paid it no mind. Molly had pulled a small but well-maintained knife from her pocket, and was already stripping bark from the branches Tommy had collected, testing each piece for strength and straightness. Jake had found a sturdy piece of deadwood that could serve as a lever. Mr. Crawford, Jake said, positioning the makeshift lever under the wagon's axle. We're going to need you to help us lift. On the count of 3, you push down hard on this end while Tommy and I get the wheel in position. Sam found himself following the boy's instructions, marveling at how naturally Jake had taken command of the situation. As they worked, the children chattered easily among themselves, their teamwork speaking of countless hours spent solving problems together. Molly worked with remarkable skill, using strips of leather from Jake's sack to bind the wooden spokes to the metal rim. Her fingers moved quickly and surely, creating tight knots that would hold under pressure. This won't be pretty, she said, wiping rain from her face. But it'll get you where you're going. Where'd you learn to do that? Sam asked, genuinely impressed by her craftsmanship. Sister Margaret says, idle hands are the devil's workshop, Molly replied with a small smile. She's got us learning all kinds of useful things. Jack is best with animals. I'm good with fixing things, and Tommy here can climb anything. Tommy beamed at the praise. Then skewed up onto the wagon to help get the makeshift wheel into position. Despite his small size, he moved with confidence and agility, positioning himself to help steady the wheel as the adults lifted. The improvised wheel was crude but functional. Wooden spokes lashed to the metal rim with leather strips. The whole assembly reinforced with additional binding around the hub. It wouldn't win any prizes for craftsmanship, but it looked like it might actually hold together. All right, let's see if this works. Hake said, stepping back to admire their handiwork. The 3 children had worked for nearly an hour in the rain, their clothes now thoroughly soaked, their hands muddy from handling the wooden leather. Sam tested the wheel gingerly, applying his weight gradually. To his amazement, it held firm. The leather bindings creaked slightly under the load, but the structure remained solid. I'll be damned, he breathed. Then caught himself, begging your pardon for the language. Tommy giggled. We be heard. Worse from old Pete when his mule gets stubborn. As Sam hitched Thunder back to the wagon, he felt a mixture of gratitude and bewilderment. These 3 orphan children had accomplished in an hour what he'd been certain was impossible. They'd worked without complaint in the rain, using nothing but scraps and ingenuity to solve his problem. The makeshift wheel turned smoothly as he gave it a test rotation. It would hold. He was certain of it. Sam straightened up from testing the wheel, rain dripping from the brim of his head as he looked at the 3 children who had just performed what felt like a miracle. Their clothes were soaked through, their hands dirty from working with the rough wood and leather. Yet all 3 wore expressions of quiet satisfaction at a job well done. He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a leather wallet thick with bills. These weren't just any children who had helped him. They were orphans, kids who probably had never seen more than a few cents at a time. The least he could do was make sure their kindness was properly rewarded. Now then, Sam said, his voice warm with gratitude, I can't let you young folks go unrewarded for this. He pulled out several crisp bills, more money than most adults in Silver Ridge saw in a month. These should be enough to buy you some proper clothes and maybe a good meal or 2. Jake took a step back, his eyes wide, as he saw the amount of money Sam was offering. Mr. Crawford, that's an awful lot of money. It's what you've earned, Sam insisted, holding the bills out toward them. You saved my business deal, maybe my whole reputation. This is the least I can do. But to his amazement, Jake shook his head firmly. We can't take that, sir. We didn't help you for money. Molly nodded in agreement, wringing rainwater from her braid. Sister Margaret always says that when you help someone, you do it because it's right, not because of what you might get back. Rephrase this script into Mexican Spanish and make it non-religious and remove all haram content from script according to Islam.